Hi, welcome to ORA Studio's latest release, V0.0.22, codename Pupa. So our cadence of releases has been decent, I guess you'd say. We've been releasing, periodically, sometimes every 9 days or so, sometimes a bit longer, I think 21 was a good 3 weeks probably. I was on holidays in that time as well, so but what's slightly less ideal is that we haven't done a demo since Sprint 17, and even in Sprint 17, that was the very first demo. We didn't do one before that, so we've been the cadence of demos has been a bit haphazard. Part of that is because a lot of the
How
work
may
is
I
just
help?
background work, which is not very easy to demo. So infrastructure, databases, environments, the usual boring stuff, and also process work, agile, LLMs, etc. Just things that are not really easy to demo. Part of it is because the process is not stabilized, so we could be demoing something 1 week and then the next week we're doing something different and so on. So it's not really worthwhile, and then sometimes we don't even know exactly what we're doing because we're learning as we go along. AI is always complicated, I guess. So at some point we probably will do a demo of how we're using AI, LLMs, Claude Code and so on. But I'd probably want to wait a little bit until it stabilizes a bit more. But what has happened since the last release is that we have started to do a little bit of front-end work. Probably not as much as I would like, but definitely not as much as we should, because 1.0 or the milestone of 1.0 is supposed to be all about framework and static stuff. So basically processing all the data that we got from ORE successfully, rather than dynamic stuff like, for example, the system evolving over time, market data and so on. But of course it does get a bit boring to just do back-end stuff, and so it's always a little bit more sexy to do these interesting things. So we're trying to add a little bit of the interesting stuff in the middle of the more boring stuff, just to keep us going. Part of the reason why we're doing that is because I bumped into a talk. I was listening to Jorg in one of these CQF events, and if you're interested in this sort of thing, I'd recommend not just Jorg's talk actually. Most of the CQF videos tend to be quite interesting, and they tend to be free as well. You just need to register. And this particular talk, Jorg spent some time talking about GMMs and mixture models in general, and how you can use that to generate reliable market data. And as soon as I saw the abstract for the talk, I was extremely interested in this, because one of the problems we always had with ORE is that we're not going to plug ourselves into real market data. We're not going to have Bloomberg and things like that. Part of it is because I don't really want to spend time doing feed work. If you've done this in the past, it's very tedious and not exactly the most exciting work. The other part of it is it costs money. You need to have all the subscriptions to all these market data providers, and there's a lot of complexity as well that comes with that. So I wanted to avoid. This is an open source project that I'm doing on my spare time, so I wanted to avoid as much as possible spending time on the things that I don't find interesting, and leave that for some later date in the future when there's a real interest for those features. But at the same time, you can't really drive the system without some kind of, something to drive it really, and that driver tends to be market data, a lot of market data. So I was interested in ways of generating reliable market data, and as I started reading through Jorg's papers and listening to his talk, I started to see that this is exactly the sort of thing we need. And once I bumped into Jorg, eventually I also saw Tease, and there's a whole world of people that dedicate themselves to mixtures and to generating realistic data. And I'm sort of entering that world now. It's not something I've done before, because of course when I used to work for a tier 1 bank, we had access to all the market data we could ever need, and I wasn't really in the quant team. I was more like sort of in between the quant team and the normal development team. which meant I didn't really have to worry about this sort of stuff. But now, of course, with ORI Studio, we have to worry about everything. So this is a topic of interest. And part of me did not want to go down this road because I know this is very time consuming, but the other part of me was quite keen because I know it takes a long time to get these things right. And by right, I don't even mean like absolutely right, but I just mean the basics working. As you can see, we spent already 2 sprints just to get some very simple stuff working. We're not even anywhere near generating things like interest rate curves and fall surfaces and things like that. So it is going to take a while to get all those bits and pieces working. And then it's good we start with plenty of time because there'll be lots of bumps in the road. So this release is a mixture then, funnily enough, a mixture, not quite a GMM, but a mixture of back-end and front-end work. And it's also our return to demo, so we're going to go start again from the beginning and just show where the app is these days, I guess. I've got here a couple of clients, a blue and a green one, and they're both ready to be used against one of these demo environments. The environment hasn't been bootstrapped yet, so we'll see the bootstrap wizard, which shouldn't really surprise you too much. It's basically what we've demoed before, likely on either the Sprint 17 demo or on the background demos. We will use our long-suffering demo company of Barclays, and we will also set up the tenant as it has been for a while. So once you've done that, you've provisioned the tenant, you can disconnect and use the tenant account and then start to populate the tenant. Not huge amount of differences here. One thing that is not ideal at the moment is that we separated a few of these components, so we can install the base system, and then all these bits are actually quite useful, ORI Analytics and Market Data Vintage, as you'll see. But at the moment you have to first install the base and then separately install the other bits. We will use the librarian for that in a minute. I am of course doing all this by hand, but while I do that I will demonstrate how I actually do this, because of course I got a bit bored having to do all this by hand, and like any good nerds I optimize things slightly. So what we've done a few releases ago, unfortunately the tenant is modal, so I can't actually, well, what I can do is, while this is going on, I'll just jump over here to our blue and I'll open up the shell here. So because I was getting a bit bored of having to do this every time I need to provision an environment, I've updated the shell now to also do provisioning. And so you see all the scripts here, these are sort of demo scripts. So what you can do is you can run this script to do the provisioning, and it will do all the steps that you've just seen there, but it's a bit easier to do that. And also it means that Claude can do it as well, so you don't have to be clicking and waiting and so on. You can just ask Claude to do this. And just like we have that script, we've got quite a lot of other scripts. Many of these are just demo scripts for you to see what you can do. For example, auto list accounts and so on. But what we'll do is we'll just, it does take a little while for this to connect, so maybe while we wait, we'll just demo some of these scripts, I guess. So I guess the first thing we need to do here is just to connect. So we can use one of these basic connects. I think I'm not actually going to run the exact script because we are not connecting as port 51004. What you'll see is if you go to the connection lists, you will see that we've got quite a number of environments. Like I said, we've got about 8 or 10 of these. Each of them run their own Claude, and each of these environments has got different ports. So the base port now is In fact, this needs to be updated, funnily enough, because just recently we moved away from ports on this high range due to conflicts with Linux's temporary port assignments. So yes, here you can see Prime Origin has been updated. So Prime Origin is already using a lower port range because we bumped into a problem where we were struggling to bind the port because Linux has decided to take one of those 5.2xxx ports for some temporary thing. So now we've bumped all the ports back down, pushed all the ports back down. I just haven't recreated all the connections here, but Prime Origin has been recreated, and you can see here we connect into port 27005. So we can copy this script, but change it slightly. 27005, if I got it right. Yeah, that's it. And then hopefully this will connect. Interesting enough, it seems like this recipe is no longer... I'm not sure where I put test here. Let's try again. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think, yes, there's a bit of a bug in this recipe. I'll fix this later. And then you can use the login recipe to actually log in. Again, I will have to update all these ports and so on. In reality, if you look at the Barclays, I mean, these recipes need a bit of updating really. But if you look at the provision recipe, you will see that we cleverly introduced the notion of variables. And this is good because it enables you to just use our .env rather than hard code variables. And we just haven't had the time to update all the recipes to go and do that. But that's really the right thing to do. And so what I'll do here is I'll just connect here as whatever account we have, which is, oh, it seems like we're done here already, so let's just connect this and finish. And then we'll just disconnect and connect again. And yeah, we can connect as either the super admin or the tenant admin. So I'll just, here we'll just connect as the tenant admin because we want to actually log into the tenant, and we want to also kickstart the setup of the tenant itself. That's also going to take a little while. And here we can just say super admin, for example. And now we're connected to super admin. And then we could, well, we could, for example, list tenants, I guess. So if I just look here at scripts, hopefully we'll see that is tenants. Tenants get all. And hopefully that will show that there's 2 tenants in the system at present, because we just created Barclays. And you can see that both of these are active. And so on. And you got other commands you can check here, like for example, you could list all the accounts. I mean, because these scripts require you to be logged in, and we've already logged in, we can just run them directly instead of having to do copying and pasting. One thing that is a little bit annoying is that we don't seem to have enough space. I think I need to remove the wrapping here. But yes, as you can see here, it's listing all the different accounts in the system. By default, it shows all the service accounts and also the regular user accounts, and so on. The shell is quite useful, and we use that quite a lot. Right, so now at this point in time, we have finished setting up the basic infrastructure on our tenant. And as I said, because we weren't clever enough, actually we do have a slight problem here at the moment with parties. It needs to bounce the service. There's a bug here. We need to bounce the cache at the moment to tell it that we've finished with that party. Something that we will look into next sprint. So hopefully if I just do something like open currencies and so on, you can see here that everything is being populated. But there is a number of things that have not been populated, like I said before, such as, for example, driver rates and other data sets. So what I'll do is, well, I can talk a little bit about this data set for a second. I mean, we are working through the data set window. It's not exactly readable, but we just added some spots. These are historical spots that we got from the Fed. If you follow some of the conversations in the RE project, you'll see I was talking to Peter about this. I was hoping I could rely on all the sample data from ORE, but I bumped into a couple of problems. In fact, I could just quickly show you the conversation that I'm having with Peter. So if you just go to RE Studio, actually no, RE Studio, RE itself, so open source disk engine, and the issues, you will see that I'm actively talking to Peter. So I've tried to use that data, and then I found out that some of the currency pairs seem to be not in market convention, and then the bits that are not in market convention are not actually inverted. So for those not familiar with this, when you have a quote that is not in market convention, we call that normally an inverted rate, and you'd expect for whatever reason that you want to invert the rate, maybe because you are in a different center, like say for example in Japan or somewhere like that, and it's just a habit. Basically their market convention is different from ours, say. But normally really you'd expect everything to be in market convention. But the problem was that we are finding things that are claiming to not be in market convention, but then the actual rate is in market convention. It's not an inverted rate. And so when I tried to import the ORE data, our importer started getting errors. And then I built some infrastructure around this to stop that from being a problem. But then, unfortunately, as soon as I solved that problem, then I bumped into another problem, which is there were some missing spots. I mean, I don't want to get too lost here, but there's this thing that we haven't built yet called the cross rates matrix, and that rates matrix expects you to have spots for all the majors, and then it triangulates all the non-majors, I guess you could say. But not all the majors are available in the sample data. So I thought I'd be clever, and because there is a time point for the sample data, I thought we could just take that time point and then find some data on the internet for all the missing spots. And I just bumped into this Fed page. Unfortunately, when I started comparing some basic triangulations, it appears that the rates are not really matching the ORE rates. So there's a discrepancy. So this means I can't really mix and match between Fed rates and ORE rates, because it would generate, well, arbitrageable, I guess you could say. In theory, you expect all your rates to be all lined up, such that you can't triangulate between rates and then generate an arbitrage, which is exactly the point of the cross rates matrix. But by mixing and matching different spot sources, I suddenly started getting to that situation where there are deltas between the rates. And so anyway, to cut a very long story short, the data that is within the ORE samples is not suitable for my purposes. I will keep this ticket open, and I'll keep talking to Peter to try to understand what's the correct thing to do. But what I decided to do instead was to just obtain all the spots from the Fed and hope that that will actually be consistent. If anyone has any good ideas for how to source historical data, that how to improve on the Fed data, then let me know. But anyway, we can just publish this data set, and hopefully it won't take too long. There we are. That's the data set published. And of course, if you then go to your market series, you will see that is a set of rates here. These dialogues haven't quite been updated yet, but yes, you can see there's a set of rates here which are going to make the core or the center of our cross rates matrix eventually, maybe next sprint. But for now, we just have all the raw stuff, all the non-derived stuff. And then once you've got that, then again, unfortunately, we're not doing this automatically at the moment in the base. We are doing that via that script that I just showed you a second ago in the shell, but we're not doing this in the UI. In fact, I just bumped into this issue as I was trying to demo this. So what we need to do is we need to use the synthetic data sets and set up one of these guys. Let's go for realistic. And then what this does is it sets up all the configuration data that you need in order to start generating simulated data. So in this particular case, you can see the same rates that we saw there, which not by coincidence are the rates that we got from the Fed. So if I just show the series again, as you can see here, you can see that we got this series for the Fed, and I just got a bunch of dates. One of the dates you'll see here is a date in particular that we got from ORE. And then you can edit one of our components here, and then you can see here we've got this option which is from vintage data. So the idea here is that in the past, or last sprint even, you needed to configure the generated data via providing a spot. And of course this became boring quite quickly because you needed to then hard code the spots, and then as you can imagine, this is not very practical. So really what you really want to do is you want to, when you start the process, you want to be able to say, okay, I want this process to start from a time point, and that time point then has an associated spot. So we now have this idea, which is not final, I'm sure this will evolve, but we have this idea now that you can supply the vintage data. Like for instance, one of the problems you can see immediately is you probably don't want to supply the vintage data at each of the feeds as it is at the moment. What you really want is to have some kind of consistency. So you probably want this guy here to have an associated vintage, and then when you start one of the sub feeds that are part of this, you want to make sure that they have data available. But for now, this is the first stab at this. We have to individually supply the vintage to each process. And so as you can see here, we're supplying the vintage of 2016-0205, which not by coincidence is exactly the same date as the ORE samples that we were using previously. And you can see here all the data that we got available from the Fed. You can choose any of these. And then you start getting into more of the orgs kind of world. At the moment, you only have some basic processes. You've got basic GBM, and to make it slightly more realistic, you've got Ornstein Uhlenbeck, but the Ornstein Uhlenbeck doesn't have proper jumps. So we've got this jump event frequency here at the moment, but there's not a lot of configuration you can do. I think we need to do a little bit more work to make this a little bit more realistic, but for now, you can configure the jumps, you can configure the drift, and this will give you some kind of slightly more realistic process. In fact, to be honest, sorry, I was just showing you the wrong thing. So this is the GBM configuration, and then on the Ornstein one in the back. Okay, so I got myself confused. So this is the GBM process that we've got. It's got some jumps in there. What we don't have is on Ornstein Uhlenbeck, not entirely sure I pronounced his name. You don't have the possibility to configure the jumps. That's what I meant to say. And of course, on Ornstein Uhlenbeck, you can't do a mixture. You can't compose. But you can that with GBM. So in GBM, if you want to, you can start to add more processes here, and then what you'll see as you add processes, they start to compose a mixture, which is starting to get towards York's paper. Of course, this is only applicable to plain spot at the moment, but eventually we'll get to more complicated market data items. And so, and of course, you still have the possibility to do, interesting enough, not sure why, okay, right, it's because our volatility was too small. So of course, if you reduce volatility to absolute minimum, nothing will happen. You need to bump vol a little bit to start seeing your sample paths going a little bit different in different random walks. And so on. So as you can see, the basic stuff is here. This will start to get populated as we go along. And like I said, for the moment, we only support spot, FX spot, that is. Um, and once you've got this all set up, nicely configured, you can start your processes. And what you'll see is your processes will start ticking. This guy here is ticking every 2 seconds. I mean, of course, you're going to probably say, why is it that the tick frequency is not stochastic itself? Again, this is part of the work that will eventually be done. For now, it's all the clocks are ticking at the same time. This is the beginning of this. So we separated the production of market data from the consumption. So the synthetic data is being generated on a queue, and then you need to bind that queue to actual to the market data that you want to consume. And automatically, I'm not sure if this is a good thing or not, but automatically, once you start producing this, it will automatically bind. I think this is probably a bad idea, especially because we will, in the future, we're going to have more than one synthetic configuration here. At the moment, we only have one, but next sprint will change that. And you probably don't want everyone to automatically bind, especially because once this guy binds, what happens with the next guy and so on. So probably what will happen is once you start, you get an option of saying, would you like to automatically bind this to the market data? So in the real world, you would bind these things to, I don't know, Reuters or Bloomberg or whatever. But in the simulated world, you can just bind this to different configurations if you got on the simulation. And once you've got the bindings, you can then start to see spot ticking. And as you can see here, spot is now ticking along. And that is basically just data being pushed from the simulator over to the market data queues and then fanned out to all the clients that are listening in. I mean, if we were to log in with another client, like say for example this guy here, let's just close a lot of this stuff. Were to just connect again to the same tenant. We still have this message that's a bit annoying, but hopefully what we'll see is the tenant will also see the market data ticking along nicely. And if he goes to the series and try to produce a chart, you will start to see, I mean this chart still needs a bit of work, but it gives you an idea. The line is slightly better. I mean you can see this massive discontinuity here because we were running something earlier on today and then nothing happened and the chart just sort of linearly interpolates I guess, between the period where there's data and the period where there's no data. So it's all a bit rough at the moment, of course. This is literally the first draft, but you can see the direction of travel. And of course you can see the observations as they start to come in. These are the observations kicking in from the simulator. So the very basics, I mean obviously this is not exactly the end product that Jorg and T's papers are talking about, but this is the very, very beginnings of it. And we will start slowly, one asset class at a time, start introducing these concepts. The very next thing will probably be the cross rates matrix, which is just something that sits on top of this, such that you'd be able to obtain any cross. And once that's done, we will turn our attention to interest rates and start to get the basics needed to bootstrap a yield curve. But that's probably going to be several sprints worth of work, I'd guess. But anyway, the basics are in, and it was a bit of fun really working on this stuff, so that was quite good. I think that kind of covers all the market data stuff. As part of this work, we also started looking into some of the entities. I mean, we are going through every single entity that we've got and cleaning them up. But some of the entities were actually missing, such as, for example, currency pairs. So we needed to add currency pairs because we didn't have them. So we've modeled currency pairs. You've now got the notion of a currency pairs entity. We also improved on what we had on currency pair conventions. So now we got some of the basic properties of the currency pair conventions, such as, for example, the pip factors, tick sizes, and so on. You would probably not fail to notice that the GDMs and the simulator is not respecting any of this. That is because we haven't actually plugged in the currency pair conventions against any of the data being generated. So for instance, if you take a pair like dollar yen, as you can see here, the pip factor is 0.01 and so on. So you'd expect that to affect how the data is being shown here, but it's not just yet. And yeah, so as with everything else, you should have support for the usual functionality. So for example, interestingly enough, I don't seem to be able to save. Okay, I think we just spotted a bug here. Okay, so changing the decimal places does not seem... Okay, let's just test that again. Discard. So I just went here. Yeah, so for some reason, decimal places field does not seem to trigger. But I think if you just save, let's say we just give it a rectification. Okay, there's something definitely not quite right going on here. So what should have happened there, and that didn't happen, is eventing should have told us that there's a new entity there. And then, as usual, you would refresh it and bring that in. And as you can see here, the decimal places has changed. But for some reason, I mean, these are just basic thieving problems. Something is not quite right with eventing. This is one of the reasons why we're so keen on code generation. This is probably some binding somewhere between NATs and message queuing and the entity and so on. Because presumably if you use one of the entities that are slightly... I mean, we have been generating every single entity with the new CodeGen templates. So hopefully this will work. Yeah, as you can see here, this is the expected. This tells us that there's a change. You see entity flashing. And then you can see the change there. If you save, I mean, what I'll do is for good measure, just open up currencies on a different client, and if we just save it here, see that's flashing, this guy's flashing as well, can bring it in, and you see that's changed. And all of this is the standard functionality that we had already. So for example, if you want to see the history, you can see what's changed. You can see here the field that changed. And so on, right? This is all standard, but a great deal of the effort that we've done is to try to make all of this stuff that you see as standard, using air quotes here. We try to make sure that all of that gets code generated so that it is really standard, because as you can see, we've already have some behavior that is non-standard here, which means that for whatever reason, eventing is not working as expected, and I bet you that if I change something here, so for instance, I'm going to change the decimal places here. We know already that's not going to work, so I'm going to save, and then we will not see this event coming through. So this proves the problem is we're not actually pushing the event through the message queue, or we're not listening in the right queue. So that's something for the next sprint. Just out of curiosity, what would happen if we attempt to update? Let's change this to minor, for example. Yeah, so same problem. So as you can see here, both currency pairs and currency conventions, currency pair conventions, which are new types added this sprint, don't seem to be plugged in terms of eventing. So something to look at. And that's definitely a very, very good explanation of why it is that we need code generation, because it's hard to, whenever you create a new entity, because there's so much infrastructure that comes standard with each entity, it's hard to get all of that to line up. So we invested a fair bit of time this sprint to clean up the code generation framework. It's slightly paying off, but it's still not quite there yet, as you can see. And so that demos this basic stuff. Let's have a quick look. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time demoing things such as the test scenarios. This is just more for our convenience. We used to, a very common thing that happens, especially when you got 8 or 10 Claudes running, they keep asking you to test something on the UI, and I don't really want Claude to test stuff. I want to test it myself, make sure I'm still keeping an eye on what Claude's up to. So I wanted to test stuff, but it was a bit difficult to transport information between the Claude session and the UI. So I created a really simple test framework that just takes in some test scenario and gives you an option to record what you see in the UI. Save this down, and Claude sees everything you see. You can take screenshots and so on. So this really sped things up in terms of our process of testing, which is a good thing. But it's not really a user visible feature. And really, I'm not sure if there's a lot more to demo, because like I say, a lot of code generation changes. The GMM stuff we spoke about, synthetic data, we spoke about shell. And then as you can see here, there's a lot of internal stuff, which is the bulk of our work really. So yeah, not that exciting really. The most exciting stuff is the stuff we demoed already, and I guess we don't really want to make this a very, very long presentation. So I'd say, I think we covered more or less everything we wanted to cover, I think. Yeah, in general, the vast majority of the work has been to recreate entities such as books. I think it's probably the only one we did as well. And related entities, so for example, a book will have statuses and the regulatory book type and so on. So these entities are also need to be generated, and there's also the management screens related to these entities. So for example, it's a bit messy still in the screens, but I think you'll find it in trading at the moment, which is going to change in a second. But yeah, as you can see here, for each of these, there has to be a screen to manage these things. So, and just like with examples that we've seen a second ago, if you change one of these things, I'm really struggling a bit with these save buttons, I think. Not quite sure what's going on here today. But yes, I think this illustrates really the problem. It's very difficult to, there's just too much variability in the code if you just use a plain LLM. Once you know what the structure of the code you want to generate, you probably want to explain in great detail, what it is you're trying to generate. And if you just rely on the LLM, you end up with exactly what we're seeing here, which is a lot of variation. And we don't really want that, because we have hundreds and hundreds of entities that we need to generate. And there's lots and lots of aspects of that entity. And so what we really want to do is we want to make sure that everything is very regular. And that's what code generation gives us. And then of course, because we plumbed everything in to our Emacs-based and Orgrom-based infrastructure, it means that if we just if we just go up to our website, which you can see from here, I mean, I probably will struggle to find this because our documents are sprawling a little bit. What is the quickest way to find this? Maybe we'll try our knowledge graph, I guess. Not entirely sure we'll get some luck with this, but I haven't actually used the knowledge graph for a couple of sprints. I just remembered. But we'll give it a go. So the knowledge graph again is just an Orgrom thing. Probably takes a little while because it's not small. Just wait. And it keeps growing, this knowledge graph as well. So actually, that is a lot smaller than I expected, interestingly enough. We are only seeing a subset of the knowledge graph. It's a good thing we had a quick look at this. This knowledge graph is filtering on something. Not entirely sure on what. Ah, here we go. And now, unfortunately, every time I click on one of these things, it basically remembered some filters we must have used in the past. And funnily enough, these filters are code generation filters, so I probably should have left it there, but there you are. I was a bit too trigger happy, and because this is such a vast graph, and it's not okay. This looks a bit more like it. So as you can see here, you start to see our knowledge graph. I probably, I think I'm going to have to do just reinstate our CodeGen filter, because as you can see, it's going to be a bit hard to find anything in this knowledge graph. Yeah, definitely there, but if I just start browsing, I think it'll be a while. So we're now filtering for archetypes. Where else can we filter by? Oh yes, we could have put archetype here. So CodeGen. Unfortunately, I think ORGRAM was not designed for very, very large graphs, because it really is very slow. I think we are abusing this a little bit, but unfortunately, that's exactly what we need. We need a really, really large graph. So where else can we filter by here? In fact, I'm slightly surprised. Oh, actually, maybe the filter didn't kick in. Let's just try again. As you can see, this is a little bit unusable at the moment. It's just too much data, really. What we'll probably need to do is to try to... yeah, the filtering for archetype does not seem to help very much. I don't want to waste too much time with this, but I would like to locate one of the archetypes just to show you. What we'll do is probably we'll just have a quick look at what is every cat. I mean, we definitely haven't got this many archetypes. Yeah, as you can see, what's happening here is it's picking up tasks that, for whatever reason, are related to archetypes. And then that's pretty much every other task that we've got, because, as you can imagine, we keep changing code generation, right? So it will probably be impossible for me to locate code generation in the middle of this sprawling graph. So yeah, there's still some work needs to be done here in order to be able to make this useful. And that's one reason why I probably have not been using the graph as much as I should. It's exactly because of this, because it's not obvious how to find things. And then if org mode also doesn't help, or the graph doesn't help with the speed at which things are restored and refreshed and so on. So it's all here. So first we didn't have a knowledge graph, which was painful. Now we do have a knowledge graph, but we can't find anything in the knowledge graph. So right, so we'll give up on that for the moment. Let's just go back here. So another option we've got to try to locate this is we could, in fact, to be honest, maybe the easiest thing to do is to just have a quick look at the current sprint, I'd say. In the current sprint, we'll have a lot of stories on code generation, like currency, for example. And hopefully one of these tasks, yeah, for example, the entity coverage matrix. I was hoping that one of these guys was going to take us to our CodeGen. Of course, I don't normally use the data from this. When you were using LLMs, this is all easier. But that does mean that we need to improve things slightly so that users can actually find things. I mean, we have a lot of pages that talk a lot about the meta model, but the problem, of course, is what we really want at the moment is not the meta model, but actual model. What I wanted to show you is the model, or the instantiation of the meta model, shall I say, because not exactly the model. But unfortunately, okay, maybe from applied maths we can get there. Yeah, as you can see here, we start to describe the implementation, and then hopefully list of facets or archetypes. So here we go. Maybe just to make sure we didn't get lost here, what we did here is we jumped from the meta model to the application of MAS, which is the theory that I invented for my PhD. And then in there, you start to see the actual templates for domain, for example. So the domain type template is this guy here. Everything uses org mode, so you can see it. You can see it prior to being tangled into an actual Mustache template. And this just describes how the entity is going to be created. And what I meant previously by regularity is that you can quite easily ensure, for example, that everything that needs to be bitemporal is bitemporal. You can also use the same entity model to project to a different representation. So, for example, you can make generators, you can make JSON IO, and so on. I mean, we've got hundreds of templates probably, which is all quite useful. And then, of course, you could then see how these templates are used in practice by looking at. So here you can see the facet catalog, which basically shows you all the different templates. These are all templates that we've got in the system, which is quite a lot. And what I wanted to show you finally is I wanted to show you the actual instantiation of these. That's why I didn't really want to use the word instantiation when we're talking about the meta model. But that is going to also in itself be a bit complicated. So let's think about this. To look at an actual model, maybe the system model is going to take us there. If we jump to tooling layer or ScodeJam, hopefully this guy yeah, unfortunately we're still stuck in meta model land. What I really wanted to show you is an example of yes, again, this is still meta model. Yeah, so perhaps we should have prepared the document. I mean, the good thing is we don't need to deal with what we're doing right here in a day-to-day basis, because of course all we care about is that Claude can find the links in the graph. So that's why I don't even know myself the path to a lot of these things. But I can imagine as a person that's not using an LLM, you probably want to know how to get from A to B. So that's definitely something we need to look into. In this case, I think actually the best way to do this is to go back to where we were, which is the system model. And in the system model, we can choose an actual, well, perhaps not foundation, but maybe if you choose something in the domain layer. So if I choose something like, say, ref data will yeah, unfortunately, I think this is a limitation of our no, here we go. Okay, so this took a while, but so as you can see here, eventually we start to get to the actual models. So what you see now is the model that is used to generate a party. Well, let's not do a party, let's do something like, say, a book, because this is what we just saw a second ago. So this model here that you see is what we use to generate the book. Good. Interestingly enough, it seems like we need some kind of constraint here. Not sure why this is so long, but so all the stuff you see here is the description of how the book should look like from a code generation perspective. I think the problem is these tables are a bit too long. And it contains all the properties, what fields we have, what columns they need an icon, and so on. And so all this is specified here. And then this is sort of the instance of the entity book. And I mean, you can't see it from here, but if you were to look at the raw source of this, you will see, in fact, to be honest, perhaps it's something we should probably do here. If you just go to our repo and look at the raw model, so in ref data, go to ref data and then have a quick look at any of these guys. So for example, this guy here, and look at the role. Don't look at the HTML representation, look at role. You'll see that there's all sorts of properties and knobs. These are just basically variability knobs that we have that control many different aspects of the code generation. It's just a regular org mode diagram, but contains many knobs. And that's what then determines what gets generated. And as you can imagine, there's lots and lots of these guys, right? So yes, when I said that we're spending a lot of time on the back end, that's what I meant. I'm trying to get all this stuff to work. We're porting across all the ideas that we had from a previous code generator, which was Dogen. We didn't really take Dogen wholesale. We slowly trying to introduce the Dogen concept, but we definitely, in fact, to be honest, I was trying not to use too much code generation, but because as you can see, it's complicated to get right. But because of this variability problem, or variation, should I say, where we end up with the LLM generating a lot of very random code with lots of small mistakes. The problem is the LLMs don't make big mistakes; they make small mistakes. So maybe they'll drop eventing, or they'll make a tiny error when they're moving from one to another, and then you have to then go and try to figure out what was the mistake, and so that's actually really complicated. Okay, but I think that's all for this demo. We've already spent quite a long time. I think we'll stop here. I don't think there's anything else I need to talk about, but this is sort of a catch-up where we are at the moment. Okay, thanks for watching.